Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Astro Consciousness channel. I'm Millie, and I am here to give you your forecast for the week of October 7th through the 13th. In this channel, we talk about the astrological energy of the week ahead and how you can integrate it into your personal and spiritual growth. But before we begin, let's recap what week we're coming from. So we're coming from a week in which we had a solar eclipse in the sign of Libra. And what I noticed with the energy of that eclipse was this inability to escape the things that we need to work on in our relationships, whether it's having important conversations, coming to a pivotal point, coming to a turning point, or finally coming to an understanding of, oh, okay, so this is where we stand. And from this place, this is where we get to build and repair from. This was like any solar eclipse. There's a bit of an aggressive energy to it. It's a solar eclipse where the sun is involved. There is a lot of masculine energy there, regardless of anything else happening in the chart. We will feel that masculine energy kind of establishing itself and saying, look at me, hear me, understand me, stop denying me. And how can we deny the sun when it shines, right? So when we understand that the energy of the sun is an inescapable energy, then we can begin to surrender, right? We could, which is the Saturn and Pisces energy. We can begin to surrender to what we're being asked to take responsibility for. Because one of the important components that I'll talk about in a second was the inconjunction of this eclipse to Saturn in Pisces. And that inconjunction was the discomfort in taking responsibility, right? In our ability to respond, Saturn, to that which has to come to an end because perhaps we didn't set healthy boundaries in some kind of exchange or relationship in the way that we should have. And so over the weekend of October 5th and 6th, the moon was transiting the sign of Scorpio. So anytime we have the moon transiting a water sign after an eclipse, but especially a moon in Scorpio, there is some heaviness there. There is some depth there. Even though a solar eclipse like Libra is something that we feel, I think, in every part of our body, of our being, some people experience a lot of tiredness, restlessness, and sleeping. Even though they were exhausted, there was an inability to sleep, which is an incredibly uncomfortable feeling. The moon was still transiting the sign of Libra, which is an air sign, which in itself is very logical. But then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we had the moon transit the sign of Scorpio. And Scorpio is about going to the root of the problem, going to the root of the cause. So the weekend could have very well felt like, man, this hurts, or this is how deeply I feel this, and this is what it does deep down in my psyche at the root of who I am. So this is where we're coming from, and this is an energy that we're really trying to shake off in order to move on with our regular day-to-day life. In come Monday, October 7th. On Monday, October 7th, we have the sun in Libra in conjunction to Saturn in Pisces. So this is where we recognize, okay, this is where I didn't set healthy boundaries in this exchange, in this relationship, in this partnership, right? This is where perhaps I should have had a contract or an agreement in which we both signed. This is where I should have had that difficult conversation last year, October of 2023, which is what is being highlighted October 2024 with the solar eclipse in Libra, right? So here we are with this in conjunction, the discomfort of having to take responsibility, where we leaned into a lower expression of Libra, which is kind of just letting things pass by, sweeping things under the rug, not setting certain things in place. Look, all of us, every single person I've talked to, myself, we are all experiencing this. We're all experiencing this in some way, shape, or form. And one of the things that we have to keep in mind, there's a few things that we have to keep in mind, but one of them being is that this isn't just us failing as human beings because we have awful boundaries. That's not what this is about. When we take a step back and look at everything that's happening in our personal lives from a greater perspective, from a more meta perspective, we have to take into account that a lot of the reason why we fail to set healthy boundaries, have difficult conversations with certain people, really assert ourselves and the place that we want to, or the role that we want to play in a certain dynamic, or the types of dynamics that we want to have with people, is because as a collective, we are coming out of a codependent collective. Codependency has never, ever been highlighted in this way more than it has been in the last couple of years, and especially in the last year. So I say this because we have to remember that the North Node is transiting the sign of Aries. And when the North Node transits the sign of Aries, one of the things that it represents is our growth and our evolution as individuals. Essentially, it is the courage to have an individuating process, which is difficult because we are choosing to do things differently than the way that we were taught. I say this because we can fall into, I messed up, I chose wrong, I did things wrong. We can really fall into a space of a lot of self-judgment of ourselves or of another, when essentially what we are doing as a collective is that we are being not just invited, but somewhat forced to come out of a certain way of being in relationships and creating a new way, a much more honest, genuine way that is within integrity of who we really are and who we want to be at this moment in time. That is not an easy ask. When we think about the difficult conversations that we have had to have in the last couple of weeks, this isn't just us versus the other person. This is us moving through generational trauma, through childhood trauma, through trying to figure out or understand or have compassion or hold perhaps the trauma of our partner, of our work associate, of our business partner. This is us trying to hold and understand something beyond the individuals that are standing before us. This is indicative of Saturn transiting the sign of Pisces, which is a structure. Saturn is coming to an end, Pisces, right? And we're experiencing the dissolving of that structure. Right now, it's through our relationships. Pluto retrograde in Capricorn, this is the shadow. This is the shadow of the previous generation, or this is the shadow of the 15 years that we're coming out of. And this is how it's playing out in our personal lives. It is so important, I think, especially over the next couple of years, for us to remember what's happening collectively in order for us to give ourselves much more grace in terms of what's happening for us and to us individually. Because if we don't, we can feel like the weight of the world is on our shoulders. And one of the lower expressions of Capricorn energy being, I should have known better. I should have done better. I should have chosen better. I should have prepared better. And the fact of the matter is, this is absolutely one of those things where you did the best you could with what you knew, because what you knew is what you were taught. And what you were taught is what they were taught, the they who taught you that, right? So keeping that in mind, especially as we have as we're still under the influence of a solar eclipse in the sign of Libra with the South Node there. This is much bigger than just us, but it is manifesting in our very personal relationships. Now, Tuesday, October 8th, we have the opportunity for repair. So here's what I want to say. Monday, Tuesday, and the first half of Wednesday, October 7th, 8th, and 9th, the moon is going to be transiting the sign of Sagittarius. And as I said, on October 8th, we have an opportunity for repair because we have Venus in Scorpio trine Mars in Cancer. So a few things about Mars in Cancer. We know that Mars in Cancer is going to retrograde between December 6th through February 24th, right? And most of its important retrograde is going to be in Cancer. Now, on October 8th, the trine between Venus and Scorpio, Venus being the ruler of the solar eclipse energy that we are still under the influence of, in Scorpio is saying, now that we've seen each other's shadow, now that we know what we're working with, right? It's probably not very pretty. There are hard truths that we have to accept about each other and about ourselves as individuals. The trine to Mars in Cancer is the opportunity to heal. Water in the zodiac gives us the opportunity to heal because water in the zodiac reminds us of compassion. Mars in Cancer is about the anger that can be residing in our bodies because of family ancestral things. That's one of the interpretations. Mars in Cancer, as I've mentioned before, is the understanding of this is worth fighting for. So let's say that the previous week, the first week of October, with that solar eclipse in Libra, you know, difficult relationships, arguments, blowouts with important people in your life took place. Okay. This week of October 7th, 8th, and 9th, with the moon transiting the sign of Sagittarius, that Sagittarius energy that reminds us there is something beyond now. Can we remain optimistic in what's ahead for us? Can we rest on the fact that we know that we are wise enough to move through this? Venus and Scorpio, there is a different level of intimacy in relationships when we confront our shadow and the shadow of our partner, our shadow and the shadow of our parent, of our friends, of our siblings. There is something very different there where when we can overcome judgment of the shadow and create a little bit more space so that there's perhaps compassion and understanding. Will that come easily? Not necessarily, but there is an opportunity there for that. So the trine between the two cosmic lovers, right? Venus and Scorpio, Mars and Cancer is, with all of my heart, I want this to work. Now, it's a trine. A trine is an invitation to commit to this. A trine, unlike an opposition, a conjunction, or a square, especially a square, will not make things happen. A trine is an invitation, and it is a beautiful invitation based on the depth and the soul of what we have seen really through the entire month of September, but especially the first week of October. So why am I stressing that this is an invitation? Because this isn't, anyone involved has to be willing to put in that work. Anyone involved has to be willing to say, look, I don't know how we're going to repair, but I genuinely have the intention to do so. And that's what that Mars retrograde period is going to be for, right? Mars retrograde is going to give us the opportunity to assess how we may be misplacing anger on someone else that doesn't deserve it. But that can only come by taking personal responsibility for the things that we are holding anger and resentment about. And that requires an immense amount of work. Okay, so October 8th is such a beautiful, beautiful day to have conversations. Not just because of that trine, but also because Mercury in Libra is also creating a trine to Jupiter and Gemini, creating an opposition to Chiron and Aries, and therefore Jupiter and Chiron are sextiling one another. So let's break this down. Mercury in Libra, trine Jupiter and Gemini. Mercury in Libra, this is your side, this is my side. This is where we each stand. We may not agree, we may not be on the same page, but at the very least, we know that this is where we stand. The trine to Jupiter and Gemini is growth can come if we are willing to be open-minded about where the other is coming from. This is a lot of air energy. So what this looks like to me is, on the one hand, if this energy isn't grounded, you can just go in circles and you can talk about the same thing a million times and you're never going to land on something. So this is perfect energy to see a counselor, see a therapist, especially if this is amongst two people or important relationships in your life, right? If this has to do with a business partnership, this is an important time where you can bring in contracts, you can bring in agreements, you can bring in an attorney, right? Very fruitful, actually. So Mercury and Libra, this is where we each stand. Objectively, stop trying to make yourself right. Stop trying to make the other wrong. That's not going to get anywhere, and that is not even the point. The trine to Jupiter and Gemini, when I can see these things objectively, okay, there's room for growth and expansion. There's room for a different point of view, Gemini. Now, Mercury and Libra in opposition at a 180-degree angle to Chiron and Aries can be, yes, but yes, but you said that. But remember this. Where are we now? From this point forward, how are we moving forward? Right? Because one of the things we also have to remember is that that solar eclipse in Libra really marked a line on the sand, the before and the after. It is, I don't think it's stressed enough how important and crucial that solar eclipse in Libra actually is. For those of you who follow me on Instagram, I wrote a few notes here and there. This is something that is creating a new energetic reality for you over the next 20 years. It is that serious, okay? So Mercury in Libra in opposition to Chiron and Aries, the wounds, Chiron and Aries, my wounds, right? Aries, me, Chiron and Aries, they're sensitive. They're at the edge of us, right? We can't hide them anymore. We can't shut them down. We can't tune them down. That's okay. That's the point. But to learn how to relate differently means that we have to walk through these things as objectively as possible, as patiently as possible, being willing to do a dance with whomever we're working things out with. But there has to be a willingness. In that whole configuration, Jupiter in Gemini and Chiron in Aries are at a sextile to one another. This is actually a really great thing because both Jupiter and Chiron in the zodiac are teachers. Jupiter in Gemini is saying, when I am open-minded enough, right? Open-minded Jupiter to see a different point of view, to see something differently than I thought I would ever see, Gemini, there is growth. I gain greater wisdom. I learn something new. Chiron in Aries is, am I approaching this? Am I meeting you from the place of my wounds or the place of my wisdom? If we are meeting each other from the place of our wounds, okay, then that's where we are. And we need to ground this. So to me, this feels like there needs to be like a third person there kind of mediating. but it has to be someone who knows what they're doing, knows what they're talking about, not just anyone who's going to come and step in who may have some sort of bias. Okay, so be very, very mindful of that. Okay, Wednesday, October 9th, we have Jupiter in Gemini, retrograde, and it's going to retrograde at 21 degrees Gemini, and it will remain retrograde till February 4th, at which time it's going to move direct at 11 degrees Gemini. So it's going to retrograde 10 degrees. What does that mean? Whenever Jupiter goes retrograde, we are being given the opportunity to work with what we've got. We don't need to learn more. We don't need to consume more. We don't need to do more, because the lower expression of Jupiter in any way is more. And in Gemini is more information. In Gemini, it's more options. It's about where are we now and how do we work with what we know and what we've got now. Jupiter retrograde in general is about finding the abundance within. And in Gemini, in the most practical way, this can be, okay, well, what do I know, right? What do I know? And if you're a content creator, if you're a teacher, if you're a facilitator, what do I know and how can I teach it, right? What can I do and how can I teach it in a way where it's truly digestible and accessible to anyone who doesn't know this? Very Gemini, right? Another thing that this Jupiter in Gemini I can see being great for is that Jupiter in Gemini has represented so much the exaggeration of information, the output of information, right? And so inevitably, it's us consuming more information, more information. To me, this feels like it's going to slow down the pace at which we are consuming information, very naturally slow down the types of conversations that we want to be a part of, right? So that we have a moment to integrate. We have a moment to collect ourselves. We have a moment to decide what we want to intentionally give our attention to, what we intentionally want to talk about, what we intentionally want to consume, particularly on social media. Because whether we realize it or not, this overconsumption of information truly affects our mental health. And while I can understand the importance of remaining informed, especially about certain things happening in the world, intention can still be had. Otherwise, we go into a space of dissociating from our lives and from what's actually happening, dissociating from our body, and feeling that much more depleted and exhausted than we may have already. So that's really important. And I think that Jupiter retrograde, through February 4th is going to be the opportunity to do that. And thank goodness, because honestly, the other aspects and alignments taking place between now and that period of time, I'm sure are going to bring manifestations of other things. And we have to be intentional with our thoughts, with our mental health, with our energy, so that we can be of better service to the world, so that we can be of better service to ourselves, to our families. So keep that in mind, because I think it's truly important. Okay, Thursday, October 10th. Now, this is why earlier I emphasized October 7th, 8th, and 9th in terms of having conversations about repair. Because on October 10th, the moon enters the sign of Capricorn. So every single month, 2.5 days, we have the moon in Capricorn. There's a sense of duty, of responsibility. Am I all caught up with my bills, with my payments? How do I feel about my work? How do I feel about my responsibilities, right? Am I living in integrity with myself? So all of the things that the moon in Capricorn is concerned with. But here's the thing. The moon in Capricorn is going to create a square to the sun in Libra. So let's say that there isn't a conversation of repair in the first couple of days of the week. And let's say that we leave it till the moon enters the sign of Capricorn. The sign of Capricorn, in a lower expression, especially if we're tired, if we're still under the influence of the eclipse, if we have had certain conversations and we're still a little bit, there's a little bit of a sting around that still. The moon in Capricorn is just, you know what? I'm right, you're wrong. I'm going to sink in my heels. This is what I believe. This is what I think, period. End of story. And it's just like this Saturnian coldness, this Saturnian wall that someone cannot penetrate. And the sun in Libra can then just represent, here's the list of reasons why I feel this way. Here's the list of reasons why I'm right and you're wrong. Now, this square that is the lower, harshest expression. Okay. In a higher expression, this is about moon in Capricorn. What am I responsible for? How am I making sure that I am not taking on responsibility that is not mine, right? Especially with the sun in Libra, especially if I'm trying to work something out and really trying hard to see where the other person stands without taking that on, right? Moon in Capricorn, how am I living in integrity with myself and with what matters to me while trying to make room for someone else? So this square is the sun, the masculine energy, our ego, right? At a square, at an aspect of tension, at an aspect of crises to the way that we feel, to the moon. So it's an interesting energy that can be constructive if the first half of the week is taken advantage of in terms of having conversations around repair. Let's say, that this is nothing to do with relationships. This is nothing to do with repair. I think that this is a great opportunity for us to really begin to take note as to how we are being asked to show up differently in our lives. Because like I said earlier, that solar eclipse in Libra really drew a line on the sand, a before and an after. And the moon in Capricorn is, how am I being intentional with the way that I'm moving through my life? And it doesn't mean that you have to make big decisions. I actually think that the second half of the week can actually bring some tangible manifestations for a lot of people, some opportunities, especially with the moon in Capricorn having to do with work and career. That may not be for everybody, but I think that is for some people. I think this moon square sun can also bring some news that you may have not been expecting, and the moon in Capricorn can feel like, okay, this is either an added responsibility that I may be happy about, that I'm ready to take on, or something that feels a little heavy and I kind of have to process. So that October 10th gives opportunity for a turning point, but we have to be very grounded within ourselves and pretty embodied, so that all of this air energy that is quite beautiful and is giving the opportunity for conversations to be had doesn't just kind of sweep us away. All right, this takes us into the weekend of October 11th, 12th, and 13th. And there is a lot going on this weekend. Okay, so we have Mars in Cancer, square Chiron in Aries. This is active all weekend. And so Mars in Cancer this is how I defend myself. This is how I protect myself. This is the anger or the rage that I may carry from family wounding, right? Or particularly perhaps from the mother side, right? Chiron in Aries, these are my wounds. This is what hurts. Am I coming from my wisdom or my pain? when I'm communicating with you. This is a square. This is a 90-degree angle. This is the first of 3 squares. The first one is going to take place on October 13th, the second, February 4th, and the third, March 6th. Why? Because Mars in Cancer is going to retrograde, and it's going to go back and forth. So whatever the discussions that are coming up, especially over this weekend, they hold great information of those internal wounds that we're all working with. The square is a catalyst for change. The square is actually the opportunity to alchemize, to transform, to come out the other side stronger by traversing these wounds, by finally facing them. And the thing is that these eclipses, this eclipse season is not allowing us to escape what those wounds are. They're not allowing us to just sweep it under the rug, to just say, oh, I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it later. I'll deal with it when I have time. No, they have to be dealt with now. And that Mars in Cancer so much represents that which is worth fighting for, especially if it's something that we care about. But the square to Chiron in Aries is going to bring up all of the wounds. And we get to say, how do we move through this? How do we move through these things that are very real together? So for anyone who's done deep therapy work, especially complex PTSD, inner child, family stuff, you know that walking through that family trauma stuff takes time. It is deeply rooted in every part of your being in ways that you don't even realize until you get there. And if you have a good facilitator, that facilitator is going to be able to walk you through those parts of your body, of yourself, right? Cancer represents the moon. The moon represents so much of our physical body, of our gut instinct, and how it's wired by our familial experiences. This is such a great opportunity for so much healing. Remember, Chiron is the wounded healer of the zodiac. It is a teacher. And in Aries, yeah, it's probably the teacher that's showing us our relationship to our anger, to our rage, maybe misplaced anger. Whatever it is, it's still a teacher. And we're being invited to look into that. Okay. Now, another thing happening is that the moon in Capricorn over the weekend is going to come to a conjunction to Pluto in Capricorn. And Pluto in Capricorn is going to go direct on October 11th. Okay, so what does this mean? Moon in Capricorn, how do I feel about the things I'm taking responsibility for? How do I feel about moving forward with this, but it's still in a way that is in integrity with myself? How do I do that, right? Pluto going direct, I think that at a personal level, it's not necessarily going to be anything new. I think it's just going to solidify what we have been seeing over the last 4 to 6 weeks. And so Pluto going direct, while the moon in Capricorn conjuncts it, is about this is how we're moving forward. This is your assignment. Pluto is saying, here is your emotional moon assignment, Capricorn. And bye-bye, right? As it goes on to make its way to Aquarius, even though it's not going to move into Aquarius till November 19th. But that's what it's saying there. This weekend, while Mars in Cancer squares Chiron in Aries, there's a lot of intense energy there. There's a lot of vulnerability there. And if that vulnerability is masked by anger, I really invite you to take a pause, especially if you're seeing it come from someone else, because usually under anger, there's some kind of hurt, there is some kind of pain, there's some kind of something there. And so whether or not you're going to move forward in relationship to a particular person, remember that beneath anger and rage, there tends to be a lot of fear and a lot of pain. It's just that that person may not be ready to be completely vulnerable with whatever it is that they're processing. They may not even fully know what it is that they're processing, and it's just coming out as anger and rage. Now, we have to remember that Jupiter in Gemini, now retrograde, is sextiling Chiron in Aries. So now that Jupiter is retrograde in Gemini, this is why I say that I don't think we're going to have necessarily have like any new revelations, because Jupiter in Gemini is retrograde. So that there's a halt on new information. We're meant to work with what we've got, right? Jupiter sextile Chiron is, we've got some work to do. We have the information. This is the information we have. This is what we've communicated to one another. This is what the wounds are. This is where they come from. How do we begin to heal? And this, I feel, is going to take from this eclipse season to next year's eclipse season, which is March and April. Now, I can see that those relationships, professional or personal, that are intentional, that are really moving forward together, that are really in it to try and understand it for themselves and for the relationship, January will be a pivotal moment because the nodes will switch signs and you will notice a difference in January and you will thank yourself. When you think about 4 to 6 months having significant growth in something that you're struggling with right now, especially with things as deeply rooted as childhood wounds and self-parenting, that is nothing. That is such a short period of time. Now, does that mean that you should only work on this for the next 4 to 6 months and then that's it? You'll be completely healed? No, absolutely not. What I am saying is that the level of awareness that we have right now is bringing so much pain that to ignore it and not try to move in a different direction doesn't help anything. And that the willingness to move out of that painful space, I think for a lot of people is going to be the catalyst that says, we have to do this differently. We have to communicate differently. We have to bring someone in that can really help us, right? So I think this week, I think there's a lot of slowing down. I think there's a lot that we're still processing. And if certain things weren't said or done yet in the previous week, this is an opportunity to actually do it. Look, please remember the bigger picture. Please remember where we are headed, or the paradigm shift that we're headed as a collective. This isn't just as individuals. We are attempting to undo and unlearn a lot of things that we were taught, that now we have enough sense to say, this isn't working. This isn't making sense. But no one ever told me how to do it differently. So self-understanding, self-compassion, self-awareness, grounding, embodiment of the self is half of just getting there with another person. But remember, everyone involved has to be willing. Everyone involved has to be willing. If not, the Mars retrograde cycle is really going to weed things out. Okay. And even though that's not going to happen again till December, January, February, Mars has already entered its pre-retrograde shadow phase as of October 4th. So this is already in motion in some way, shape, or form. And that requires slowing down and introspection. So much love to you all. May this be of service, and I will talk to you next week.